Hey everyone, how are you? It's Makeda Valletta, also known as the Renaissance Amazon. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I'm in the airport, super busy airport right now. I have my earphones on. Hopefully, this video will save so I can post it on YouTube. If you can't hear me, let me know. But while I'm on my layover in this Orlando airport, on my way back from Colombia, I just wanted to have a conversation about race, identity, and confusion in Latin America. Okay. If you watch my other YouTube videos, you know I talk about racial issues a lot, especially in Latin America, because so many people are unaware of how black Latin America can be, and or how white it can be. A lot of people, when they think of Latin people, they think of people that look like J-Lo or something, and it's like people from Spanish-speaking countries can look as African as somebody from Sudan, or they can look as white as somebody from Ireland. And they can be indigenous, they can be part Asian. Like in Peru, you have a lot of Chinese and Chinese who mix with the indigenous people. So there's a lot of different mixtures in Latin America. However, the way that Latin America and also race is a social construct, meaning your race can vary depending on where it is you live in the world. The United States is the one that made the rule that one drop of black blood makes you black. That's not based on anything scientific or factual. That's just the United States rule. That's not the same rule in Puerto Rico or Brazil, even Jamaica or Africa. There are people who consider themselves black in America who are light, bright, and damn near white. And if they went to Africa, Africans would say, you're not black, So race is a social construct. Not everybody defines race the way the United States defines race. I honestly think that the U.S.'s one drop of black blood rule doesn't make any sense, okay? It doesn't make any sense. There are so-called black people in America who look white as hell, but because they have one drop of black blood, they're black. Doesn't make sense, right? But on the flip side, in Latin America, you have so many categorizations, okay? You got Los Negros for black people, Morenas for brown people, Las Indias for the Indians. You got Mestizo for those who are mixed with Spaniard and Indian. You got Blanco, you have all these different categories. And then from those categories, there's a hierarchy with white being on top and black being on the bottom. If you're, mulatto, black and white, you're above a black person. If you are Indio, you're above a black person but below a white person. So they have like this whole gradient, okay? Whereas in America, for the most part, you could say it was black and white, even though I will argue that light-skinned black people were not treated the same, as dark-skinned black people in America. I feel like light-skinned black people have had some things a lot easier than dark-skinned people, but for the most part, under the law, we were all treated the same. Now, the categorizations in Latin America make more sense to me because, first of all, in Colombia and Cuba, you literally see black people who are the color of black. Like, I've seen way more dark-skinned people, and I mean really dark people in Cuba and Colombia than I've ever seen in the United States. I've seen people who were way, just like their skin was super, super dark. Never, like even my Nigerian friend who grew up in Nigeria, when he came with me to Santiago de Cuba, he told me he had not seen people that dark in Africa. They look like, some of the people in Cuba look like they were from Sudan. They were so dark. I don't see people in the United States that dark. Like the darkest person I've seen in the U.S. is probably Wesley Snipes. They're darker than that in Cuba and Colombia. So it makes sense to call them black because they are, right? Then you have Los Morenos who are more brown, maybe my complexion or whatever. It can vary from like brown to a lighter brown depending on who you're talking to. And a lot of times Morenos may be part Indio as well. But even when you're dark skinned, you could be part Indio as well, so that can be a little bit. But the thing is, it's in Latin America, they don't talk about race the way that we do in North America, and it's a problem. And no offense to any Spanish-speaking people, but sometimes I feel like people from the Spanish-speaking world are really slow and really lost, except maybe Cuba. So many people in Latin America don't know who they are, okay? They don't know who they are. And it's not just the black people. It's also indigenous people. Like I was just in Cartagena de Indias, and it's like, you read the history and they keep saying that they destroyed all these indigenous people, but the majority of the people that you see walking around in Cartagena de Indias are indigenous people. Just because they're not wearing their traditional garb, just because they're speaking Spanish, not their traditional language, and just because they may be cut off from their indigenous traditions doesn't mean that they're not Native Americans, that they're not indigenous to their land. And they don't look like Africans. They don't look like Europeans. They look like indigenous people. And they're everywhere in Cartagena de Indias, and they're everywhere in Colombia, period, all over Colombia. Like, you have indigenous tribes in Colombia who are still intact, who live, isolated from people with their own traditions. But you also have indigenous people in Colombia who are disconnected from their indigenous traditions and languages, but they're still indigenous, right? So the thing is that last night, like, I was standing outside when I was walking around Cartagena, and there was this beautiful black woman. She had this huge afro. So that's the thing about, in Colombia in general, you see a lot of black women with natural hair. In Cartagena, there's so many black women with natural hair, and some of them are American. So it's like all the American black women who go to Cartagena have afros, they have braids, twists. Like, you see all these beautiful black women with natural hair. So last night, I saw this girl singing in Spanish with some drummers, and they were playing a rhythm I had been studying earlier that day, actually. And she had a beautiful voice, beautiful big afro, and I wanted to film her, but I didn't want to be invasive. So I was kind of watching, thinking like, damn, can I film this? And then this man started speaking to me in English, and his English was totally perfect, and which I'm not used to. I wasn't used to people speaking this is perfect English. So he asked me if I wanted to record. He's like, yeah, go ahead, you can record it. So I asked him, where are you from? He told me Miami. And he was like, light-skinned black person, which you would call a light-skinned black person, right? And so he starts telling me that he lives in Cartagena now, that his dad was from Colombia, and that his mom was American, and that he was here researching his heritage, right? So he's like, I'm doing a documentary on my heritage, and he was saying that, like, so many black people come to Cartagena. I guess he meant black Americans, and they didn't know there were so many black people here. And he was like, they're shocked, and he was saying that he was shocked. And he was saying he's researching his heritage, and now he's on the point of slavery. He was like, I'm on the point of slavery. He was like, slavery was really big here, and my mind is blown, and I'm so shocked. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I've known that since I was a kid. Like, I've known since I was a kid that there was slavery in Latin America. And this is what I always say. Race problems, and my dad is the one who made me aware of this from the time I was a kid. Race problems in Latin America are way worse than they are in the United States. Way worse, okay? Because first of all, there's way less black people in America than there is in Cuba, Colombia, a lot of the Spanish-speaking world. But everybody knows that black Americans exist. Everybody knows about us. Everybody knows about us, okay? But yet, people don't know that there's black people in Peru, that there's tons of black people in Colombia, there's tons of black people in Cuba. Like, Cuba, I've been to Havana and Santiago, and they're both mostly black. Okay. Tons of black people in Venezuela, all of that. A lot of people are totally unaware of that. And this is what I say too about black people in America who keep complaining that, oh, I'm so tired of slave movies. I'm so tired of slave movies. It's like, first of all the slave movies that have been made in America have been about North America. Slavery was not just in North America. It was in the Caribbean. It was in South America. It was in Central America. And because so many of you don't read and school didn't teach you about the slave trade, because the slave trade was not just to North America. They also went to the Caribbean and South America, and slavery and slave societies were not the same in all those countries. They weren't even the same in all parts of North America. Like slavery in Virginia was different than slavery in Mississippi. Slavery on a cotton plantation was different than slavery on a tobacco plantation. But then, depending on whether or not you were colonized by the Spanish, the French, the British, it was all very different. And so, it's so funny because somebody said black Americans seem to be very ignorant about culture overall. Actually, that's not true at all. Black Americans have been the leaders in that. If black Americans are so ignorant about culture, then why did Marcus Garvey come to Harlem? Jamaica's full of black people. Haiti's full of black people. All those islands in the Caribbean are full of black people. Brazil's full of black people. But Marcus Garvey went all the way up to New York City. He didn't stop in Miami. He went to New York City, to Harlem, to a black mecca of Afro-Americans. And if you want to know why he did that, you can read about it, because Marcus Garvey talks about how Afro-Americans were the cream of the crop when it comes to black people, to the black world. All of my African friends, they didn't really have an identity, really know and understand what it is to be black in this world until they came to North America and they were around black Americans. Because in Africa, race is not really something they think about because everybody's black. But Africans don't own anything in Africa, and they're being exploited. And a lot of Africans seem to worship white people in a way that Afro-Americans do not, okay? You will see Africans right now praying to white Jesus. And everybody's black. They have a skin bleaching problem. The natural hair movement started in America by Afro-Americans. You have people like Catherine Dunham. Like, a lot of times, people offend me a lot because people are constantly telling me they thought I wasn't American because of how worldly I am and the things that I know. And it's like, that's typical of Afro-Americans. We have been a lot of the leaders when it comes to that, first of all. So no, Afro-Americans are not ignorant when it comes to culture. Black people in Latin America are ignorant when it comes to who they are, because there's a few people who are exceptions to that rule, and I've been around some of those exceptions to that rule because I study Afro-Puerto Rican, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Dominican drumming, stuff like that. So I've been around some of the people who are more aware. But last night, this dude, he looked like he was damn near 50. He's gonna tell me that, he was born in Colombia. He says to me, because everybody's outside, in Cartagena, it's not a lot of white people. It's mostly Los Negros, Morenos, y Los Indios. And everybody's, singing and seems cool. And one thing I like about Latin America is that people keep things light. They tell a lot of jokes. They joke. But not ever talking about race also is dangerous, because I have had people, like when I was in Cali a couple weeks ago, was a light-skinned Colombian guy who was mestizo. He grew up in Jersey, and he was telling me about how the police harassed him in Jersey, but he doesn't have any problems in Colombia, and how there's no race problems in Colombia. And I'm thinking to myself, you say there's no race problems in Colombia because you're white in Colombia. In Colombia, in America, they might have looked at you like Hispanic, and in America, they might put all Hispanics in the same category. But in Colombia, you being a mestizo, light, bright, straight hair, Spanish-speaking person, they're not treating you the same way as they're treating Los Negros in Colombia. Because you go someplace like Medellin, which is a mostly white city in Colombia, and it's amazing. Very up-to-date. But when you go to the place where it's a 98% black on the Caribbean coast, totally different situation. Buenaventura, Choco, nothing at all like the rich white parts of Colombia. And it's very well documented that black people in Colombia are treated unfairly. The government ignores them, doesn't fund, doesn't give them the same funding. Same story everywhere, except it's worse in Colombia than it is for black people in America. In America, we have black people who are politicians. We have black people who hold political office from local to presidential. We have plenty of black politicians, and we have for decades. In Colombia, they don't have any black politicians. They might have like 2 out of like a fucking 150 or some shit. And it's only because the government mandated it, because they might have been from the parts of Colombia that was like 98% black, so they had to have a black person. But you don't see like black people in high positions in Colombia. You see that way more in America. You see black people in America that have made money, not just athletes and entertainers, but also doctors, attorneys, business people. Black people in America have achieved a lot, especially given what we have been up against, and the fact that America is mostly white on this huge continent where we are 12%. There's way more black people in Colombia, but nobody knows that. The black people in Colombia have been seriously isolated. And the thing about Latin America, too, is that they love to put white faces on black shit. And as much as I love Puerto Rico, I see this a lot with Puerto Rico, where and I'm just going to be honest, because I study a lot of different things, and I'm going to say it like it is. I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm also not going to lie to appease people neither. But, you see Afro-Puerto Rican traditions like bomba. I've been studying bomba since 2006. Most of the people I see doing it in New York, in California, in Chicago, they're not black. They may be mestizo. They could even be Spaniard. Maybe they have 1 drop of black blood. That's not evident. Okay? They're not black, most of them. But because in America, a lot of people in America, because you guys just don't understand the complexity of race and how it's a social construct, and you don't understand your history. A lot of black people in America, when you bring up Puerto Ricans, they'll say, "Oh yeah, but they're black. Puerto Ricans are black." No, some Puerto Ricans are black. Not all Puerto Ricans. Some Puerto Ricans are white. Some descend from the Spanish. You got Chinese Puerto Ricans and Japanese Puerto Ricans and indigenous Taino. You have the African Puerto Ricans, people who are mixed, just like you do in North America. Everybody is not one race. Or you'll see a white Hispanic, like on Love and Hip Hop, you have this girl Mariah Lynn. She's a rapper from New York. She's white. People be like, "Oh, Mariah Lynn's not white. She's Puerto Rican." Yeah, Puerto Rico is the nation she comes from, but ethnically, she's white. Like that's like saying, "Oh, somebody's not black, they're American," or somebody so and so's not white, they're American. American is a nationality. It says nothing about your ethnicity, right? So you can be white and be Puerto Rican, okay? All Puerto Ricans are not black. Just because somebody's Puerto Rican doesn't automatically put them in the black category. Now, the thing I appreciated about Cuba is that in Cuba, when you see black traditions, you see it done by black people. In Cuba, you see salsa bands who are the lightest person in the band is my complexion. The whole band is black. So when people see me dance or other black people dance salsa, and they're like, "How you learn how to dance that?" But salsa came from black people in Latin America. Rumba came from black people in Cuba. And the history, one reason why I hate ballroom dance is because ballroom dance, like all that Dancing with the Stars shit, they take traditional Afro-Latino dances, like rumba, which comes from poor black people in Cuba. Black people, like visibly black, undebatably black people, okay? Not people that you have to question if they're black. No, you look at them, you know they're black. That's where rumba comes from in Cuba, and it's a very sexual, erotic dance. In the 50s, because Cuba was super racist, before Castro ended segregation, and this is one reason why I can't stand Miami, because I never experienced blatant racism until I was in Miami. The white Cubans in Miami look at you in disgust. I've had this experience several times in Miami, and I can't stand those bitches, and I will say it over and over again. I'll say it over and over again because this is my country. This is where my ancestors come from. This is the land my ancestors fought for, and I'd be damned if somebody comes from another country and looks down on me and my people. Absolutely the fuck not. Anyhow, those white Cubans in Miami act like they live in their own country, like they're not in America. They're blatantly racist. And in the 60s, they voted to keep segregation legal in North America. And when Castro ended segregation, because before Castro, it was illegal for blacks and whites to dance on the same dance floor. Before Castro, Cuba was a horrible place for black people. They treated dogs better than they treated black people in Cuba. And Castro ended that. A lot of the racist white Cubans who are in Miami left Cuba because they couldn't stand that. And they're still racist bastards, right? Some of those white Cubans in Miami, if you look at like the politicians and stuff, they look just like they could be related to Donald Trump. They're just as white as he is, okay? So last night, this guy, he's telling me like, oh, he's from Miami again. People think I'm hard on Miami, but those people aren't that bright. I'm sorry, that is not. He's from Miami, and he's telling me that, he was born in Colombia, but he moved to Texas when he was a kid. He said he moved to Houston when he was, he says to me, he says to me, in Colombia, we don't see color, and it's all good. And he said, when I moved to Houston in the 80s, when I was a kid, they called me a nigger in school. And then I went home and told my mom. Now, he told me his mom is American, but she is from Denmark. So she was white, had blue eyes, white woman from Denmark. And his father was a black Colombian. He said, he kept saying my father was black, like really, really dark, right? So he moves to Houston, and somebody called him a nigger in school. He said he went home and told his mom, and his mom said, oh, welcome to America. And that's what his mom said to him. So then he says to me, like, he was used to being in Colombia where nobody judged him and he wasn't classified. And I was like, dude, first of all, it wasn't like that in New York in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s in New York, and most of my friends were half white. And nobody had a problem. Like, that was never an issue. So it might have been an issue in Texas. It wasn't an issue in New York City. And when you're saying that in Cartagena, like you're saying that you said in Colombia nobody sees color, but you're talking about being in Cartagena. I asked him, have you been to other parts of the country? And he told me he had just been to Barranquilla, which is like right down the road from Cartagena on the Caribbean coast. And he had been to Bogota. And that was it. So he had never been to Medellin, which people talk about all the time. And Medellin is very white, very, very white city. And my Airbnb host from Cartagena, the last time I was there, told me that it was racist. 2 people told me that it was very racist towards black people. And I noticed it's super white in Medellin. But it's like, with any country, depending on where you are, it varies. And Latin America has its race problems. Right now in 2019, they still wear blackface on TV and in performances all throughout Latin America. Even some Puerto Rican musicians I know from New York, they were doing a show in Puerto Rico. This might have been like 6 years ago. And they told me that at a festival in Puerto Rico, people came out with blackface on. And the band I know from New York, they were like, oh, hell no. Like, they didn't feel comfortable with that. But they're New Yorkers, That chick, Zoe Saldana, who I can't stand that bitch, that Dominican actress, she put on blackface and prosthetics to play Nina Simone. And when black people here got upset with that, she didn't care. She did it anyway. We don't get down like that in America. We don't get down like that. But people in Latin America still think that's fine. Now, okay, so this light-skinned dude, again, he's telling me this. And I said, dude, you might have felt like nobody judged you in Latin America in Colombia because you were in Cartagena. Have you been to the really white parts of Colombia? Number one. Number two, he was also a light-skinned black person. And it's like, and I said to him, the dark-skinned black people in Colombia, they don't have shit. You see how they live? I mean, like any of you, you can go on YouTube right now and go look at it. Go look at the vast difference between how blacks in Colombia are treated and where they live and how isolated they are. I mean, you have like, same thing with Brazil, you know? And even last night when I was out, I told you, Cartagena is mostly brown and black people. And when I was out last night, I noticed that, okay, like, it's like 2 in the morning, there's food everywhere. People are selling, every 2 steps, people are selling all kinds of food. They're cooking on the street. And I started to notice, like, there was constantly people, like, digging in the garbage and picking up garbage off the floor, including used cigarettes. And I noticed that all of the people who were digging through the garbage and looked really fucking dirty and lost, they were all black. I mean, dark-skinned black. It was like the darkest people in Cartagena even, okay, which is a very black city. They were on the bottom. Then you see the black, when I say black, again, I'm talking about dark-skinned black, okay? The darkest people. In Colombia, the women, they have the fruit baskets in their head and they pose for tourists. That's all they're doing. Fruit, sitting there with fruit and posing for tourists. All the stores where people are actually selling things and making money, you don't see dark-skinned people working in any of those stores. The dark-skinned people are outside selling fruit with an Aunt Jemima outfit on. Something that Afro-Americans find offensive is seeing a big grinning black person with watermelon, right? Afro-Americans find that image offensive. We find the Aunt Jemima outfits offensive. But then you go someplace like Cartagena and it's like all the black people got watermelon and fruit. Basket of fruit, big watermelon, and it's like in an Aunt Jemima outfit, like they're still servants and slaves. Like they're still servants and slaves. So this dude, okay. So he goes to tell me about how he's stuck on slavery and he can't believe it. And I'm thinking, you dumbass, like you're fucking Colombian and you didn't know that there was slavery here? That's what I'm thinking in my head. So then, but when he starts trying to say, but a lot of Americans, they don't know, that there's all these black people here. I said, the reason why Americans don't know this shit is because of the racist ass Latin America. It's not because of America. It's not us. It's not our fault that we don't know that y'all exist. We don't know that y'all exist because Latin America is racist as fuck. If you go on to the Spanish channel, you don't see black people on the Spanish channel. You see white people on the Spanish channel, okay? If you look at ads from Latin America, you don't see black people on it, except maybe if it's a soccer team and they'll have a couple of the black athletes. But you don't see that. You don't see that. Even this white guy I know, a friend of mine from New York, he's a camera person. And he was in Brazil. This might have been 10 years ago. He was filming a commercial for a beer company. And he said that they wanted them to capture, I forget, it was some Afro-Brazilian street dance. I forget the name of it, but it was some kind of popular Afro-Brazilian street dance. He said, of course, like it's just like every place, the black people did this dance. But when the beer company saw the footage and saw all the black people in the videos, they got upset and said they wanted to see more white people. But he said, but the black people are doing these dances, not the white people. So you want to see a bunch of white people in this video representing Brazil doing black dances. Now, in North America, because we had a civil rights movement, because we had an I'm Black and I'm Proud movement, because we had a black arts movement, people know that we're here. People know that we exist. The whole entire fucking world knows about black Americans. And we are a sheer minority in this country. The slave trade in North America ended way before the slave trade ended in Colombia or Brazil. Those places are way blacker. But people barely know black people there. So I'm like, the reason why people don't know that is because your country is racist as fuck. But then you're standing here trying to act like you don't have race problems in your country. Are you fucking stupid? And then when I try to tell him your experience in Cartagena is, you can't base that on all of Colombia. You can't say that all of Colombia doesn't have a race problem because you didn't have a problem in Cartagena. That's like me saying America doesn't have a race problem because I didn't have a problem growing up in New York City. And I didn't. And most of my friends were half white. But then when I met my cousin when I was 17, I have a beautiful cousin who was 3 years older than me. She grew up in Minnesota. And she was very light. Like, you can't necessarily even tell she's half black, but she's my blood cousin. And she's gorgeous. And when I met her when I was 17 and she was 20, and she grew up in Minnesota, and she told me about how they used to write "nigger lover" on her mom's car. She told me that the principal of her school told her, we have a quota of Negroes in this school. They were trying to kick her out. A white dude's in a football team tried to run my cousin over with his motorcycle. Okay? And my cousin's telling me this in 1999, the year I graduated high school, and I'm like, what? That shit is happening? Because that shit was not happening in New York. But I had to realize that New York is a bubble. New York doesn't represent all of the United States. The United States is a huge country. It is very different in different parts of the country. And that's true of all countries, including Colombia. So I'm like, dude, your dumbass can't be in this small little fucking town of Cartagena and think that it's all good all throughout Colombia. Do you fucking read books or do anything? And then when your mom, what an idiot. Like, to me, if you're a white person and you're going to marry a black person, you need to be down for the cause. I'm not against interracial couples, but if you're black and you marry a white person who's totally fucking naive, shame on you. Because there are white people who realize what the fuck is going on. And his white mother should have told him, you're black, son. But she didn't. And then his dumb ass goes and says to me, well, yeah, but my father, he was black, but he was very, very affluent. So the fuck what if your father was very affluent? What does it have to do with anything? He still should have told you who you were. Just because you're affluent doesn't make you not black. What kind of dumbass shit is that? So it's like the more he kept talking, he just sounded so stupid. And I was looking at him like, is this man really this dumb? I'm like, yo, the bad part about Latin America, never discussing race, is that a lot of people are stuck on dumb, okay? And that's one thing I loved about Cuba, is that in Cuba, black people are very much aware of who they are. I mean, you still have a few who try to say that race doesn't matter. Like when I was in Cuba last time, it was a light-skinned Cuban girl that was trying to tell me that. It's never a dark-skinned black person who'll tell you that shit. I mean, even in Jamaica, we know that color matters. And that's why I wanted to do a video about colorism, and I will do a video about that to really get into that. But that's why you got people in Jamaica bleaching their skin. They have beautiful dark skin, and most people in Jamaica are dark skinned. But when they're saying, oh, I can't get a job with this, blah, 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 that shit's real. There's a colorism problem. And so, you know, it's like in North America, we had a civil rights movement. We've fought for certain things in our identity. Meanwhile, you have people in Latin America steadily telling you, we don't have a race problem. And that's why I respect Amara La Negra. You know, if you don't know who Amara La Negra is, you should, but you probably do. She's Dominican. Only thing is, I respect her and her movement for speaking up about the issues of blatant racism amongst black people in Latin America. But the problem is that she's not the brightest. Like, Amara La Negra is not that eloquent. She does a horrible job at explaining herself. When people asking her simple questions, she really does a horrible job explaining it. But Juju, who's Cameron's ex-girlfriend, or she's in Love and Hip Hop New York, she's a black Cuban, beautiful, gorgeous woman. She does a very good job at breaking it down and explaining it, and it's very simple. Very simple for those who are so confused that there's black people in Latin America. Very simple. The transatlantic slave trade, the slave ship didn't just stop in North America. Okay, it stopped in the Caribbean islands, it stopped in Central America, it stopped in South America. Slaves were sold all from here to there, from Cuba to Colombia, from this place or that place. So, yeah, it wasn't just North America. And actually, the shipment of Africans to North America ended a couple hundred years prior than it did in Brazil. Like, when slavery was ending in America, Brazil was still getting fresh boats, fresh shipments of Africans. So you had people in Brazil and Colombia who are way closer to the source of Africa than in North America. Okay? And so I'm thinking to myself, dude, you don't notice that the darkest people here are on the bottom? And when I say that, he's like, yeah, I do. So then how are you going to sit here and tell me that race doesn't matter here? Are you that stupid. Like, I actually walked away from him because I was just like, I can't. You just too like. I'm telling you, I'm an intellectual snob, and I'm never gonna apologize for that. I'm not. Some people just are not smart enough to be talking to me. I don't have the fucking patience. I'm like shocked and appalled at the ignorance that so many people have. And it's like, shame on your parents. They did a horrible job that your ass is 50 and you're just now realizing who the fuck you are. And you still sound like an airhead. Read some damn books. Like, he acted like he was stuck on slavery. He's like, I'm just stuck on that. I can't believe. It's like, first of all, there is a series on Netflix called Esclavo Blanco, which is the white slave. And I haven't watched it because it's just so dramatic, but my dad watched it and somebody else that I know, and they said it was very good. It deals with slave society in Colombia, and slave societies and slave systems weren't the same in every country. And Latin America differed very much from how it was in North America. There's tons of books written on this, but people don't read. So because of that, I do think that slave movies are important. But a lot of black people in America complain about it, as if it's like some kind of conspiracy against us. But I just feel like, and that's one thing I love about Cuba, and that's one reason why I wanted to go to Cuba so badly, was because I love the fact that the black people there knew who they were. And when you're there, you see tons of books about, the history of Africans in Cuba, and, there's tons of books about that topic, okay? But the other thing is, when you read the history of Cartagena de Indias or North America, they're always like, oh, they killed all the native people, and that's totally not true. It's not true in North America. It's not true. They're indigenous people. I see them every day. Some people think they're white. Some people think they're black. Some people think they're Asian, but they're Native Americans. And you definitely see them all day, constantly in Colombia and South America. So I'm like, they weren't all slaughtered. But I've known people from the Dominican Republic who were straight Arawak, straight Taino, whatever indigenous tribe is on that island. And they would tell me, oh no, I'm Dominican. I'm like, yeah, but you're indigenous. They're like, oh no, I'm Dominican. Okay, what's Dominican? Like, you could be African origin, you could be Spaniard origin, you could be indigenous origin. So what is Dominican? It's just a nation. What's your ethnicity? Oh, I'm just Dominican. I'm like, damn, y'all brainwashed, And then the white people who sometimes think they're not white. Oh no, like Christina Aguilera. Oh, she's not white, she's Hispanic. She's a white Hispanic. I don't understand why people have such a hard time understanding that. When people speak English, people understand it. When they speak French, you could understand it, that there's white people that speak French and there's black people that speak French. But why all of a sudden, when Spanish comes into the play, people act so confused and stuck on stupid? I feel like with Latin America, all the joking and laughing is cool, but they, a lot of times, minus Cuba, and minus a very small sector of people who actually stand up, a lot of black people in Latin America, or people in Latin America, period, always want to act like, oh yeah, we don't have those race problems. Yeah, yes, you do. I remember when I was a teenager, my dad had pointed out to me that there was, in the Dominican Republic, I don't know if somebody was running for president or some kind of political office, and one candidate called the other candidate a monkey. Now, there was a candidate who was dark-skinned, black candidate, and the lighter candidate called him a monkey while in this presidential race, and there was no problem. There was no problem with it. But in North America, there'd be a problem. Or Amara La Negra talks about how people have put on blackface to imitate her, So there's definitely some serious race issues in Latin America. And this is something that I can continue talking about at another time, because I'm sitting in the airport and Need to get ready for my flight soon, and I hope that this video saves. I'm doing this on my IG live, but I want to save it so I can repost it to YouTube. Sometimes my videos don't save. I don't have the memory on my phone. But I think that the categorizations in Latin America make more sense. Like, I feel like, with America, when it's just black and white, there's more than that, and in America it's just black and white and all the Indians are dead. That's the story we get told, which is not true. And there are a lot of, if people think black people are lost, I think a lot of indigenous people are even more lost, because there are people I've known, like, even like Candy Burris, for example. Candy Burris, her mom looks straight Cherokee. Portia Williams, who's from Atlanta Housewives, her mom looks straight Cherokee. Shaka Khan looks Cherokee. Celia Cruz, to me, looks Taino Arawak. Celia Cruz does not look African to me. She looks indigenous from that island. The indigenous people from the Caribbean and South America are not light-skinned. Like, even this morning I saw this man. He was darker than me, but he was definitely indigenous Native American person. They don't look like Africans. And if you can't tell the difference, that's like saying all melanated people look alike. Like, people could say all Asians look alike. And people know that Chinese and Japanese and Korean, they don't all look alike. But to a blind mind, ignorant mind, they may all look alike to you, to an untrained eye. Some people might think that about black people or melanated people, but that's what you're basically saying when you just throw everybody into one category. Because I definitely can see the indigenous people amongst us. All through the Americas, they're not gone. They're not wiped out. That's a lot. But you have indigenous people too, who don't see who they are. They're just like, I'm Colombian, I'm Puerto Rican, yeah. So, the mixing is cool. People have been mixing. Most people, I feel like in North America, people are way more mixed than they even are. Like in I keep saying Latin America, but let me say in Colombia and in Cuba, you see a lot more black people who actually were isolated. You see a lot more black people who you could tell they were isolated. They just look like there's a whole town full of super dark people. Only place I've really seen like that in America is Savannah, Georgia. In Savannah, Georgia, it's like, if you're my color, you're like out of place, because everybody is like really dark. Savannah, Georgia had it was like one of the biggest slave cities too. But you can see, not in America, well, talking about Cuba and Colombia in particular, that certain groups were isolated for sure. And so there's a huge percentage of very black and African people. And Colombia also has a huge retention of African traditions. One of my Dominican friends was telling me that a lot of his black friends from the Pacific coast of Colombia have African surnames, Congolese surnames, and different kinds of African surnames, which I didn't know. A lot of people know about the African retention in Cuba, but they don't know about it in Colombia, and it's strong. People know about it in Brazil, but it's strong in Colombia, and probably even stronger than it is in a place like Haiti, because since Haiti was free early too, they weren't getting like a whole bunch of new Africans in, but Colombia has a huge African retention, and people need to start understanding how black Latin America is, and how all the cool music that comes from Latin America comes from black people, just like in North America. Just like in North America, it's the black people. And that's why, to me, going to Cuba was so refreshing, because I'm like, oh, finally, black salsa bands. Because a lot of people, even in Latin America, don't know that it came from black people. They don't. Because in Latin America, they really want to erase that history and act like, oh, we're all the same. And that's not true. If you've been to Colombia, if you've been, with Cuba, I did see black doctors and black pharmacists, and even though the people that own the businesses in Cuba, none of them are black. Anybody who owns the business, they're not black. They're not. Because I remember being in Cuba, and one of my friends asked, like, what do you have to do to open up a business here? And the guy immediately told her, you can't open up a business here being an American, right? But she wasn't asking that. She was wondering, how do they open up businesses? And he said, The people in Cuba who have businesses is because their family came to the States and sent them money back to open up their businesses. And most of the Cubans who've come to the States are white. It's not the poor black Cubans that come to the States and make money and send it back so their family can open their business. No, it's the white ones. So the white people in Cuba, it's the white Cubans that have the businesses. You know, and seeing black pharmacists and doctors, we can thank Castro for that, because before Castro, Cuba was a very racist place. That's why Castro was always welcome in Harlem. And he's hated in Miami, because Miami's full of a bunch of ignorant ass, racist white Cubans. I have never experienced blatant racism until I went to Miami. I've been all through the American South. But none of the white people in the South have ever treated me the way white Cubans have in Miami. I can't stand them. When I tell you I can't stand them, I can't fucking stand them. And then you had this white Cuban chick on Love and Hip Hop Miami that said the N-word in one of her songs, and black people were upset, and she was trying to argue with the right to use it, talking about, I'm from Hialeah. Who gives a fuck? Hialeah is a white Cuban neighborhood in Miami, and white Cubans have a legacy of being racist. And if black people, and even independent of that, if black people are telling you that they're offended by it and you don't give a fuck, you want to fight for the right to use it, that's where I have no tolerance for that shit. That makes me want to slap a bitch. Slap a bitch. Because I am Afro-American. And I do come from a family of freedom fighters. I come from a family of people who literally fought in this country for all of the rights that colored people have here. And I never use the N-word. And I don't like hearing people say it all the time, but I definitely don't want to hear your white ass say this shit. No, absolutely the fuck not. And stop with the, oh, but I'm not white, I'm Cuban shit. Because you're a white Cuban. So, yeah, I just had to just get that off my chest a little bit, thinking about this stupid conversation I had with this man last night, how fucking dumb he was. And his parents not teaching him who he was. Goddamn shame. To be 50 years old just figuring out who the fuck you are and you still stuck on stupid. Black people in America are not that fucking naive. We are not that naive. We are not that lost. So people need to stop saying that black people in America are lost. We're not fucking lost. We're not. So I'm tired of that. And I'm tired of people telling me, oh, they thought I wasn't American because of what I'm into and what I know and how I look. When some of the most beautiful women, or quote-unquote exotic women I've seen have been right here from North America. I've been to Jamaica. I've been to Cuba. I've seen way more attractive women in Atlanta, in New Orleans, in Detroit than I did when I was in Jamaica, than I did when I was in Cuba. Not to say there aren't pretty women in those places, but I've seen more beautiful women in American cities. And even with Colombia, I've been talking about how beautiful the women are, but like this time I really, as I paid attention, I'm like the majority of the women in Colombia, well, I've been to Medellin, Cali, and Cartagena. The majority of the women are not bad. It's just that every now and then you see one, you know? But it's like, just now when I was in Medellin for like 3 days, I didn't see anybody look like anything the whole time I was there. Now, if you're in Atlanta, just go to the post office, go to the supermarket, go to CVS. You're going to see some badass black women who you're like, God damn. Like, you see that shit every day in Atlanta. You see it every day in New Orleans. I've seen that every single time I've gone to Detroit. Something's in the water in Michigan because I've seen some of the most beautiful fucking Amazon-type chicks ever coming out of Michigan. So I'm tired of people acting like, oh, if you're beautiful and exotic, you must be from the Caribbean or something. Because, nah, let's stop with that. I will bet anybody, you go to a freaking party in Atlanta and compare it to a party that you went to in Jamaica or a party that you went to in Medellin, Colombia, or whatever. And I bet you Atlanta will got them girls beat. I'm just going to say that. And the black girls in Atlanta, they come from all over the country. They come from St. Louis. They come from California. They come from Chicago. They come from Detroit. They come from Mississippi. They come from fucking New Jersey. They come from all over America. So let me end this video and make sure I don't miss my flight. And I have people around me, so I'm kind of limited in what I can say. Hopefully you guys heard me okay. And follow me on YouTube, The Renaissance Amazon. Leave your comments, and this conversation will be to be continued. And you can check out some of the videos I've done on blacks in Latin America as well. All right. In the meantime, do your research. Read some books, learn some shit, okay? There's no excuse in 2019 to be so goddamn ignorant. All right, people. Have a good day. Bye.